I guess the way as we, I guess, understand the Christian worldview more, we actually realize that everything is spiritual. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Erin. Why do you laugh when I wish you a Happy New Year?
Because you have a goofy smile on your face.
That's not a good way to start the new year. Actually, it's Happy New Year to those of you who are pagans, who practice the Gregorian calendar, which is our current calendar that we use in the Western world.
And you don't use it.
And no, I actually am a Christian, and I go by the Christian calendar. So this really is not the beginning of a new year for me.
You already had your New Year.
Yes, though the new year begins with Advent, with Christ our King Sunday, and with Advent and with Christmas. And I start the new year by focusing on Christ. Now you and the kids, you're pagans.
You're just wishing the rest of us a happy New
Year. I'm trying to meet you guys where you're at. And so
right. Well, you do like the New Year. You are what people would classify, I think, as an optimist. I think you lean more toward optimism. So you like New Year's. You like thinking about, what will we do this year, and what's an exciting thing could we start? What's a new plan? Or you always have ideas.
Go
and
on.
I'm more of you say I'm a pessimist, but I like to say that I'm a realist. And so New Year's for me, I typically reflect on all the plans I've failed on in other years.
Okay. Can I do a survey with the listening audience? I want to hear from you guys. I want to know, would you characterize just what Erin said right there as realism?
Yes, we
or
would.
Pessimism?
We
I know
would.
all the pessimists are going to send in messages.
No,
oh, yeah, that's realism.
The realist will send in that they relate to me, because you will be on this positive, like, oh, let's do this and that. And I always think, well, that'll fail. And so
more is being revealed
so New
about
Year's
our marriage.
For our marriage can be sometimes put a strain on it, because I know what will really happen.
Like the strain we're feeling right now as we do this podcast.
No, but this year I did actually think about some things that we have brought into our lives, good habits, and that they've stuck. And so that is good. I'm not a pessimist through and through.
Well, now all of this is not just pointless banter at the beginning of a podcast. We are actually going to talk about planning and goal setting and really getting your family on, I guess, some track, whatever track that might be.
Just get it on a track.
All right. Some of you crashed and burned at the end of last year, and now it's time to get the family back on track. The scriptures do talk about planning. I mean, think about Proverbs 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Right? The plans of the diligent lead to abundance. And of course, Proverbs are general wisdom. They're not promises, they're not guarantees, but there's planning that we want to do in our lives that help keep our families on the right track, whatever we deem that is. You look at Jesus in Luke 14, he's actually talking about the cost of discipleship, and the break that can happen even in family relationships if your primary allegiance is to Jesus. But then he refers to in verse 28, Luke 14:28. He says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him." And just in the context of discipleship, following Jesus, counting the cost, making plans, right? Figuring out what needs to happen, to complete this, to see it through. And of course, that's an important principle in following Christ. But it's just this larger general principle in our lives in general, is that it takes some planning. And however we do this, whether it's creating a vision statement for your family or whether it's just doing yearly goals, it's important to be, I think the important part of it is the intentionality.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to talk about this because, all joking aside, people do reflect.
Wait, no, we're not, just so you know, we're not going to put joking aside. You mean for this point coming up?
Right.
Okay. We just can't put joking aside.
So don't worry. So people do at this time of year plan and reflect. And for example, the little gym that I go to at the beginning of the year, it's always packed because people are like, oh, okay, I'm back on track now. And then by February, it's empty again, and we're free to move about.
That observation is a good observation, is that a lot of times these goals or these ideas, or maybe even, those who are overly optimistic, not me, but you may start off well-intentioned, but if there isn't some planning, isn't some follow through, well, just like Jesus says, right? If you lay a foundation, but you're not able to finish, well, I guess people are going to mock you. All who see it begin to mock him. So maybe mocking would be a good tool. Like if you set out a goal and you are done with it by February, we should mock you.
Yeah. I should just mock the people that are new that I haven't seen there.
But mock them in the love of Jesus. I mean, it's well-intentioned.
But
mocking.
I do like, as we talked about doing this episode, thinking about goal setting and prioritizing and habit forms through the lens of Christianity, following Christ. How do we prioritize that and do it in a way that is different? It would seem like it ought to look a little different than just any of our neighbors who don't follow Christ. Our goal planning, our prioritizing, our lives ought to look different, even if we go to the same gym and do the same sorts of things in that way. How do we think about it as a follower of Christ? And like in Luke 14, which is a heavy passage about if you love your father, mother more than Christ, if you love your own life more than Christ, it's bad.
Yeah, that's the technical theological way to put it.
It's a heavy passage.
Yeah. No, it just in there. So it speaks of this intentionality and this planning that we need. And so,
and that planning that we need in the context of discipleship, which I think includes all of what we're talking about. New Year's resolutions should be put in the framework of being a better disciple of Christ. And so that might include health stuff, because maybe we've gotten lazy or gluttonous, or we're doing things, we're eating things or doing things that are not good for the bodies that God has given us. So it can lead to that's what I mean by it can lead to some of the same things our neighbors are doing maybe, but it should be through a different lens, in that how can I be a better disciple of Christ this year? And this is a parent podcast. So how can we lead our families, our children, in discipleship through Christ this year in a way that we reflect on, like I said, I did really reflect on things that we've gotten better at, but what can we do better? What's needed in that, and just doing it through that lens.
Yeah. And so it's this idea that we talk about all the time, which you've got this Christian worldview, and it should permeate all of life. And so often we have compartments. We've compartmentalized our Christian faith, right? And so our religious activity, well, that's when you bring in scripture, and that's when you think about these things. But so much of life, we're kind of maybe on autopilot, or just following along with the culture. And we're saying, hey, even when it comes to the idea of setting goals is actually a biblical idea. The idea of planning and being diligent and wise, that's a biblical idea. We see that throughout the Proverbs. And so how do we even do goal planning in a biblical way, which many of us haven't thought. So, okay, Erin, you threw that idea out there. How do we do that?
Well, I think it's a complicated thing. So I think you look at different areas. So I think I was about to interrupt you and say, well, unpack the worldview thing just for a reminder, because I think oftentimes we say, setting goals through a Christian worldview, it's like, oh, so I should do a new Bible reading plan.
Oh yeah,
and we put it in just the spiritual category.
Right.
Now, some of us, if we don't have the habit of reading the Bible, then the Bible reading plans are really good. Mm-hmm. And I'm in one right now. I started a 1-year one about 2 years ago, and I'm still going through it.
Wait, it was supposed to be 1 year?
It was supposed to be 1 year.
But you're sticking to it, though.
I took the marathon.
Hey, I did a 2-year master's degree in 10 years. So that's just our style. That's just the Kunkel style.
That's just the way we do things. No, so I've had interruptions of doing different readings. Either our church, like when our church was studying the book of Acts, I paused my Bible. Okay, so I have some excuses. I also have just flat out missed days and gotten behind too. But anyway, so the Bible reading plan, though, helps me stay on track. So I'm not pushing that aside or anything, but we oftentimes think, oh, let's do our New Year's resolutions through a Christian worldview. So that means we need to commit to church and read our Bible more.
More spiritual activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I probably didn't follow through on that thought about compartmentalizing, but that's what you're getting at, is that I guess the way we understand the Christian worldview more, we actually realize that everything is spiritual. I mean, all human activity. So whether it's parenting or marriage or politics or economics or cooking or gardening, the Christian worldview weighs in on all of it. It should inform how we view all human activity. Mm-hmm. So all of our goal setting is spiritual in that sense. And so that maybe is the first step, is seeing all of our activity more and more through biblical lenses, which is, God's view of all of reality, and that actually Christian truth touches every aspect of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's where, through that, you can see how, going back to your question, how do we do that, Erin? It's so you think about all the areas of life and how our Christianity weighs into that. And if you don't know how it does, then you have to do a little homework to think about it. But of course, most New Year's resolutions are about health. And so just taking that one little issue of health, how do we think about our bodies through a Christian worldview?
Yeah, you just got me thinking, because I'm thinking, all right, so some of our goals, we're going to have, we're going to maybe have the category of like marriage and family. But some of us don't actually have a well-developed view of marriage and the family, a biblically informed view that goes beyond, hey, it's a man and woman, right? But what do we see in maybe the Genesis 1 account and the first commands that are offered to humanity? Be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth and rule over it. Even how does that inform our view? Because then our view of those things is going to flesh out in how we set goals or what activity we think we should be doing. I mean, the vision that you and I have of our marriage isn't just, we got married and we're a couple now because it brings self-fulfillment to each of us. It makes us happier. That's a kind of an individualistic Western view, very American. Like, you get married, you have family because it makes you happy. It brings you self-fulfillment. So even before we get into some of our goal planning, there may be some theology that we need to do, some scripture that we need to study, some questions that we need and it's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lifelong process of constantly growing in the development and the cultivation of a Christian worldview.
Yeah.
So
and I'm glad you said that, because for me personally, when I first became a Christian, and if I would have heard someone talk like this, I would have no idea what they're talking about. What does Christianity have to say about how I spend my time or my body or things like, I just didn't have a really well-developed theology on this stuff. So it's taken me a long time. I've been a Christian now almost 29 years. So it's a journey. And so that's why I say when you set goals or you think about things and you think, oh, I have no idea what Christianity has to say about this, that's okay. You might just have to do some work and figure out what Christianity does have to say about all these areas of life.
I was thinking about the topic I just brought up about marriage, and there are a lot of good resources out there for people. And this is where it is a challenge to find good resources. And so we constantly want to point people to good resources. But just thinking about the issue of what is marriage and trying to have a robust theology of marriage, I just wanted to highlight a good resource. Our good friend John Stonestreet, our good friend Sean McDowell co-wrote a book dealing with the issue of same-sex marriage, and it's called Same-Sex Marriage. But they start with the question, what is marriage? And they have a very good discussion in their book on that. And so that if you are sitting there listening to this and saying, gosh, I don't know if I have a good Christian view of marriage, or I can articulate the Christian worldview on marriage very well, get that book and just read that section on what is marriage. It's very helpful.
I think another great resource for, especially on this topic of goal planning or habits and thinking about life in a healthy way, I think the book of Proverbs is just so rich. I know you already read one, and we have some others to read, but the Proverbs is so rich with wisdom, life wisdom. And the verse you read, I think that would be a great verse for a family to memorize together with your kids. And as you read it, I was thinking, oh, maybe that will be the next verse I do with the kids, because there's so much depth to that verse and to so many Proverbs. And on a goal-setting podcast, the Proverbs has 31 chapters. And I started, I think it was 9 or 10 years ago, but I started the habit of reading a proverb a day. And
Chapter a day?
Sorry, yeah, a chapter a day. Okay. So there's 31, so every month you can pretty much read one a day. And I kept up that habit for years, and then I don't do it every day, but a lot of times I'll realize, oh, I haven't read the Proverbs for a while, and I'll look, oh, what's today, the 15th? And then I'll just jump right back in to that habit. And it is so good to have that habit of reading a Proverbs a day, because there's so much wisdom of, like I said, just daily life, how to live, what to prioritize, how to avoid things. And this topic of goal setting, Proverbs is rich with advice on how to prioritize things, how to set goals and focus on God, and then how to be successful in your goals. So maybe we should read a few of those.
Well, yeah, there's a few other verses, because so when it comes to goal setting, bringing our Christian worldview into that in several different ways, at different levels. Even how you view reality is going to influence what particular goals you choose. So, for instance, like we said, how you view marriage and family is going to influence what goals you end up setting. But then Proverbs 15:22 says, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. And then you've got Proverbs 11:14.
I just love that one too. Without counsel, plans fail. With many advisors, they succeed. We all know that when we've gotten advice and have wise people instructing us and knowing these goals, it's true. You are way more likely to succeed in those goals. Anyway.
Proverbs 11:14, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. And so there's general wisdom in getting more than one person, right? Thinking about these things. Now, of course, someone might think, well, there's other proverbs that say, that an abundance of counselors can, lead to disaster. And that's where proverbs are general wisdom. And so part of that is in maybe who you're getting counsel from, but there you see both sides of that. Sometimes you get too many people weighing in, and it can really mess things up. But also getting counsel from others can be a wise course of action. And
getting wise counsel, seeking counsel from people that have wisdom.
So
is a part of that.
Part of it would be thinking about who you're getting the counsel from.
Yeah, Proverbs has a lot to say about that.
Yeah. But so we often think about goal setting in a very individualistic manner, right? And so
especially Americans think of goal setting very individualistically.
Americans think about everything very individualistically.
Yes, we do.
We all do. We're infected with it, all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, you, the kids, me too, of course. I was about to include me in
sure
there.
You were.
But no, we all are infected with this rampant individualism, this hyper individualism. So I know my bent would be, hey, I'm going to write out goals. I'm going to create goals. I'm going to set those.
And no one's going to get in my way.
And no, no, I wouldn't say that. Well, maybe. But no, that I would not often, like lay that out before the family and even say, hey, I want you guys to look at this.
Yeah.
I have some accountability friends that, we would share those together, but not even really thinking about, bringing my family into that.
Which would make sense if you're thinking about it back to the Luke passage in the context of discipleship. And so do we bring those plans not only to our family, but with this view of discipleship, being a better disciple, and then submitting ourselves to the people around us for accountability, for input, to submit to maybe what other people think we ought to do too, who have insight into our lives.
Yeah. Well, right there, we have trouble with that whole idea of submitting. I mean, you said submitting our plans to other people. We don't do that.
Triggering.
I may inform them
yeah.
of what I'm doing, right? But to submit my plans, to give them maybe some input that says, this may not be a good idea, or to give them veto power or something like that. We don't like that.
No, we don't.
We don't?
We don't. You too.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if that was your attempt.
I was giving you
sarcastic.
the look.
I could see the look.
We don't like that, do we?
Yeah, if you are watching the podcast video recording on YouTube, you see that. You could see that look.
Okay, so thinking about categories of goal setting through a Christian worldview, as a follower of Christ, in the context of discipleship, what do you want to? You want to interrupt?
What, no, I wasn't sure if you were.
Oh, I was going. I was going to our categories.
But you don't want to go to the categories yet, Erin, because I think this stuff was important. The bent, like thinking about.
Oh, you skipped over that.
I didn't skip over it. I didn't get to it. I was just introducing this.
Oh, you threw me off.
These podcasts are scripted very carefully. We run through them multiple times, and this shouldn't happen.
It's so obvious.
Who's our producer? Who produces this podcast? It's
okay, so
what we're saying,
we were talking about being individualistic.
Yeah, so that's the American way, but biblically, you see not a hyper-individualism. You often see when you read through the New Testament, particularly Paul's epistles, there's this flavor of, and this emphasis on submitting your personal rights often to the body, obviously to Christ, but then to the body. And not that you lay aside all things and kind of become like a martyr or something. No, I'm thinking Philippians chapter 2, right? Look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. So there's a healthy, appropriate self-interest, but all of the one another's of the New Testament, how Jesus talks about, the church as family. There is a much more group orientation within the New Testament. So, and this is where the Christian worldview actually can bring some balance, right, to this, and help us see that there's a healthy view of the individual, right, but then there's also a healthy group view. Mm-hmm. And there are some cultures where there's so much emphasis on the group or the family or the larger, set of individuals that you almost blot out the individual, and Christianity kind of is able to take both those things. So what we need to do is hyper-focused, individualistic Americans. We probably need to swing it back the other way, and so bringing our family into the goal setting is really key. Mm-hmm. And there's some really good benefits to that.
Yeah, I think so. I think. And this is something we could do as married parents, single parents, families that are sharing time with the time that you have with your kids to sit down and say, okay, it's the new year. So we're thinking about New Year's resolutions. So let's as a family think about this last year and think about things we did well this year. What do you guys think we did well as a family? And then what do you guys think we didn't do so well as this year? And let all the kids, no matter the ages, have some thoughts. And you could write them down and consider them. And then together say, how do we keep these good ones? Or let's keep these good ones. Hasn't it been great? And then how can we work on these ones? And again, letting them contribute to that would be so much more helpful in having our kids not only holding us accountable to things that maybe we want to change, but that they have ownership in it too. So then in March, when you're tempted to get rid of the habit or go back to old habits, you can have another family meeting and say, hey, remember in January, we talked about as a family, this being something we wanted to do or this being something we didn't want to do. And here we are either doing it again or not doing it. So how can we work on this together? Yeah.
And it's not just mom or it's not just dad. It's not just the parent who is dragging the kids along with us.
Family meeting. This is what we're doing this year.
That really speaks to the ownership that we want our kids to have in our families. And so there actually has to be a posture of humility on our part to get to that point where, I mean, what you just said was really practical. I don't know, some people, I'm just thinking some people might be a little overwhelmed by the idea of goal setting as a family, and that's just not them. And well, it doesn't have to be this formalized process where, you get all the stuff down on paper and then frame your goals and put it on your wall or something like that. I mean, some of you who are whatever, type A and
they'll laminate it and do all the things.
Like, you can do that. Go for it. But for a lot of people, it might just be the start, a real practical step, a real starting point could be just the conversation you just pointed out. Hey,
Yeah.
what do we do right? What do we do
Yeah, you
wrong?
might just look at the calendar, say, okay, this is all we did this year. And maybe you'll hear from the kids, oh, I really loved when we did this camping trip, or it was nice when we took time off of soccer, or
Yeah.
just getting their feedback. It doesn't have to be a formal thing, or it depends on the personality of your family. But I think this is modeling for them too, that healthy people pause and look back and reflect, and healthy people set goals and say, okay, we didn't do this well. We're going to try again to do it better. And that's okay. It, like you said, it models humility. Oh yeah, we did. We remember. Yeah, we said we were going to do that. We didn't do it too well. So it models humility of failures or things we've messed up on, or whatever it was. Even if it's looking back at this year, we fought more this year than we've ever fought before. And maybe we could work on that as a family, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
but you need space and time for sometimes this stuff to come to the surface.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight that is going to require humility. It really, you could become defensive as a parent. And then that's just going to derail this if you get defensive when your kids say, gosh, I don't think we did this well as a family.
Yeah.
And, but so if we're humble and are open to that feedback, then man, I think that can have a real impact on our kids, their continued buy-in into the family. And it doesn't just become mom or dad or, mom and dad against kids, but this gives them ownership in this goal setting and in the family. And, so doing this together as a family.
Yeah.
Now, there are some categories that might be helpful. It might be helpful to put some of the things that we want to accomplish or we want to see happen, some of these goals in these larger categories. And so, marriage, let's say marriage is one of those categories.
Yeah. And I think if you are a married couple, that beside your spiritual life, that should be maybe the first area you look at and reflect on with your spouse, and look back and see what could be worked on, what would help in certain areas. And or maybe it's just we're doing fine, but we've kind of gotten out of the habit of doing some of these things, and we should get back to that.
Yeah, and so it could be something like, hey, we just don't do regular date nights. And so we need to schedule that. And maybe it starts with, maybe for some it just starts, okay, once a month. That's going to take a lot just to do it once a month. Or maybe it's
especially when
you
have little kids. It's like once a month. I remember, now we can leave our kids home by themselves. When the kids are little, it was so much harder to navigate. So different seasons of life, sometimes, just if we could go out one night a month or twice a month where we leave the kids, go out to a quiet place. When they're little, I just loved going to quiet places.
It doesn't have to be something you invest a ton of money in. You can get creative.
You could go to Taco Tuesday somewhere and then go on a walk somewhere. I don't know. We were always creative in different date night things and what we could afford.
Yeah, and maybe if you can't go out, you even still do a date night, but just do it at home. Hey, this night we're going to get the kids to bed.
Yeah.
At a good time, we're going to go sit outside on the back patio, and whatever, share a tea or a drink or a glass of wine or whatever it might be. And that would be your date night. But now here's where I think that even when you're planning stuff for marriage, it's good to have the whole family involved. Number one, you're going to model for your kids, some really good habits and goals and, things about being a married couple. But then number two, having the kids buy into that, especially if they get a little bit older and they have, if they are able to kind of prioritize, okay, mommy and daddy have date night today. So we need to do, this and this to help them have that.
We always made date night fun for the kids because they got to stay home and typically order pizza, which wasn't, like so we tried to make when we were gone that they were doing stuff that they loved. So getting to eat something that they loved, and then also it typically would include they would get to watch a movie, which on normal weeknights, that doesn't happen. And so if we had a date night on a Tuesday night or something, they would get to watch a movie. So our kids have always loved when we've gone on date nights.
Yeah, they've always had a lot of buy-in on that.
Yeah, actually, our youngest son the other night, he's like, yeah, you guys should go on a date night. And I'm like, and I said to him, I feel like you're wanting us to leave. And he's like, yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, unless they're planning something terrible while you're gone. But it's a good thing that your kids buy into it. And saying that as a family, mom and dad want to do more date nights this year, that would be a great thing to model for the kids. Under the context of marriage, of course, there's time alone, so nurturing that, prioritizing that. There's also the dreaded topic of finances that every parent has to deal with. So thinking about how did we do our finances this year? Were we both involved in that? Do we feel like we're in a good place with that?
Did we give enough money away? Did we, were we generous enough?
Yeah.
And again, you can see just the value of bringing the whole family into that conversation.
Yeah. There's the topic of calendar, and even thinking about as a married couple, if you managed your calendar well, did we leave margin in our calendar? Did we prioritize each other? Did we prioritize our kids, time alone with our kids maybe? Or is dad working too much? Is the calendar so filled up with things that dad's missing, or mom? These sorts of things, looking at the calendar. And we did a whole episode, didn't we, on calendar and how we do that?
Our weekly meeting.
But just we learned quickly in our marriage that we were fighting a lot over, I thought you could do this. I thought we were doing this at this time. And so we started the habit of weekly sitting down and going over a calendar. And it helped us to fight a lot less.
Yeah, we avoided what we called train wrecks, where
yes,
you would schedule something, I would schedule something, or we just have an expectation of, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be there. Well, yeah.
Yes.
And
so that's another category and thing that you can bring the whole family into. And I'm also thinking in this topic of marriage, sometimes this is a hard one for couples because there's, something that is just a source of tension, and you might need help. You might say, this year I want to work on this, but if I go to my spouse, it's going to just be another fight. And so this is where what you were talking about, bringing in community, can be helpful. So maybe this year it's being intentional about finding a mentor couple or a counselor or someone to help you through some of these things in your marriage that need to be worked on. And that would benefit the whole family if you prioritize it.
Yeah, so those are some practical ideas for, and you see there's a larger category of marriage, then helps us to kind of maybe set some individual goals underneath. You could have the larger category of family. All right, what are some family goals?
Wow, I mean, so many things can fall under this category. We talked about time together. Of course, managing screen time. Technology is all around us. So reflecting as a family, how did we manage technology this year?
Yeah, maybe that one starts with one goal could be, hey, let's read a book out loud together on technology and just thinking about, how technology affects us.
Yeah, and maybe you did a good job this year. It doesn't have to be negative. Maybe it's we managed it well. We kept screens out of the bedrooms. We didn't, stay on our phones too late. Maybe your kids are getting older, and so they've proven that they can be trusted. And so this year, maybe they get a little more screen time, or they get a little more freedom, and because they've shown they're trustworthy. So sometimes sitting down and doing this is a time where you can actually say, oh, hey, you've been doing a really good job with this. And because we oftentimes forget to tell our kids when they're doing things the way we want them to do. So this intentional time can be time where you say, oh, we've done well, and you guys were a part of that. So that was really good.
So that's an area. Maybe it's setting some goals to where you want to be intentional as a family to spend some good family time together. And so maybe it's having maybe a family night, maybe a night set aside where once a week you're going to do something, or it's going to be some planned activities. I mean, your my sister-in-law, your sister.
I think, my sister and her husband, I think, do this so well. Well, one thing they do is Friday night movie nights. And so every Friday night they watch a movie as a family, and they have a cool little movie room in their basement in Colorado.
And they have 4 kids.
They have 4 kids, so every Friday they rotate which kid gets to pick the movie to watch. So the kids look forward to the weeks. I'm
sure they make popcorn and have snacks.
Yes, and they also do talent shows as a family too. Remember, we were there for one of those. So they are so good at these intentional fun activities, and their kids love it. And then when we're in town, we get to be a part of it too. But just simple things can really bond your family, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. And it's just prioritizing, pushing other things out of the way.
Yeah, and you can create some rich family traditions.
Yes.
Health.
Health is another category. Yeah.
So looking at food, diet, exercise, those kinds of things. What are some goals that we can work on as a family? And this is where, I mean, again, getting that buy-in also allows there to be some accountability, some mutual accountability amongst family members.
Yeah. Especially you think about spouses and how we can help each other with this. And I know for myself being, I'm a middle-aged woman. So
wow, you just admitted that publicly.
Okay, so women, men have hormones too. Women have hormones. They change in middle age.
Yes,
and so, oh my gosh, no commentary. So I have noticed through, especially these past 5 or 6 years, how prioritizing my health really affects your and my relationship. It affects my relationship with the kids. And so you helping me to prioritize that, because I'll oftentimes say, oh, shoot, I don't have time for that. But when I realized how much it was affecting me, I was getting bad headaches when I don't exercise, things like that, even if it's just a 30-minute walk kind of thing. But you helping to encourage me, and even with the kids saying, no, mom needs to leave for a walk, you figure it out. That is so helpful in prioritizing things like that and how we can help each other. And so saying to your kids, this year we've gotten into a bad habit of this, or this year I want to keep up this habit of no desserts on the weeknights, only desserts on the weekend, or whatever it is. I've heard families doing all different things, but doing things together, being on board with each other and encouraging one another. This is the blessing of family and community.
Yeah. And then, you could have another category, which I think we need to come up with a good name for this. I don't want to call it spiritual, because it seems like it compartmentalizes it, right? These other areas of, goals are not spiritual. Maybe we call it church involvement, or maybe we go back to the old term, piety.
Oh, that is an old term.
Yeah. We got to unpack that on a future podcast. But the idea that, hey, there's going to be goals that we set for our reading of scripture together, or there are going to be goals that we set in terms of our involvement in church. Maybe this year we're gonna figure out a way that each of us in the family can be serving in ministry and exercising our spiritual gifts.
Yeah,
we're gonna set goals for generosity and looking to, to bless others. So those are all just some different, hopefully practical ideas and areas in which we can set goals. And if we do those as family, then just built into that process of sharing that with one another, there's group buy-in, family buy-in, but there's also mutual accountability.
Yeah.
And of course, in all of the goal setting, we go back to the Proverbs. Proverbs gives us some other wisdom when it comes to planning. Not just that it's a good thing, but our planning always needs to be brought into submission to the Lord.
Yeah, that we don't divorce our plans with God, our relationship with Him, and what He might want for us as we move through this next year. And so, yeah, Proverbs, I love the Proverbs. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand."
Proverbs 16:3, "Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established."
Proverbs 16:9, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps."
So we always bring the Lord into our planning. And so even as you have these discussions as a family, then maybe at the end there's prayer over these things. Mm-hmm. They're saying, hey, look, mid-year, if we seem to be off on this, if this doesn't seem to be something really that it fits with God's will or purpose for our family, we need to adjust. But we're always going to submit our plans and our goals to the Lord. And then Proverbs 3:5-6, in our planning, in the work that we do and trying to bring a Christian worldview to all of this stuff, we trust that the Lord is working through all that, and we take all those plans and all of that we do, and we trust in the Lord. And that's Proverbs 3:5-6, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.